Dakota Territory, August 1883. The sun was just beginning to rise over the flat, dry horizon when Victor Prescott reined in his gelding at the edge of his homestead. What caught his eye first was not the low groan of the wind through the cottonwoods or the scent of dust rising off the land. It was the pale shape curled beside the body of a horse near his northern fence line. He swung down from his saddle, boots crunching against the brittle grass. The horse was an old mare, white around the muzzle, sides heaving slow and shallow. Beside her, a woman lay sleeping in the dirt, arms wrapped around the mare's neck. Her dress was torn at the hem, dusty, her boots scuffed through, brown curls stuck to her cheek, and her face was streaked with dried tears. Victor stepped closer and crouched, eyes narrowed. "Miss," he said, soft but firm. She startled awake, eyes wide and confused. Then she sat up fast, hand going to the horse's side. "She is still breathing," she said, voice raw. Victor looked her over mid-20s, maybe. Thin from travel. Not local. He touched the mare's flank. "Barely. She is not going to make it through the day." The woman's jaw clenched. She blinked hard, trying to pull herself together. "She carried me all the way from Bismarck. I could not leave her." He nodded once and stood. "Come inside," he said. "We will mourn together." She looked up at him, eyes red-rimmed and tired. For a moment, she did not move. Then she rose slowly, one hand still on the mare. Victor waited. When she finally stepped away from the horse, he led her across the dry field toward his home, a weathered, two-room ranch house with a porch that sagged a little on the east side. Inside, it smelled of coffee grounds and saddle oil. He poured her a cup of water, and she drank like someone who had not in days. "I am Victor Prescott," he said, setting the tin cup down on the table. "You came a long way. What is your name?" "Celia Johnson," she said, her voice steadier now. "I left Bismarck 3 days ago. I was looking for my brother. He worked cattle out this way, but I think I came too late." Victor leaned back in the chair, watching her. "What happened to him?" "Shot. 2 weeks ago. Wrong place, wrong time." "I only found out after I was already on the road." Victor did not press her. He understood loss. He had buried too many people to ask questions before a person was ready. "I have oats," he said. "Bread too, if you can keep it down." She gave a tired nod. "Thank you." He stood and moved to the hearth, slicing bread and setting a pot of beans to warm. She sat quiet, arms wrapped tight around herself. Outside, the wind blew through the yard, low and hollow. "I should bury her," she said after a while. "The horse." "I will help," Victor said. They did not speak much as they worked. The ground was dry, hard-packed, but they dug beside the cottonwoods where the soil turned soft with shade. Celia knelt beside the mare, stroked her muzzle one last time, and whispered something Victor did not hear. Then he took the rifle from his saddle and ended the horse's pain with one clean shot. She flinched but did not cry again. They buried the mare in silence. When it was done, Victor handed her a clean cloth for her hands, and they sat on the porch in the late morning sun. "I have not slept properly in days," she said, voice quiet. "You can rest here," he said. "Spare bed is made up. You will find it warmer than the ground." Celia gave a small nod. "I will not stay long." "You do not have to decide that today." She looked at him, then really looked, and something in her face softened. Later that day, while she slept in the back room, Victor sat on the porch with his coffee and stared out across the dry land. He had been alone for a long time. It had not felt like loneliness until now. When she stepped outside near sundown, her face was flushed from sleep, hair tied back. She looked steadier. "You are quiet," she said, sitting beside him. "Just thinking. About." He glanced over. "Where I might find your brother's name. Might be someone at the stockyard who remembers him." Celia looked down at her hands. "You do not have to go to the trouble. I do not mind." She smiled, small but real. "Thank you, Victor." They sat like that while the sky turned amber. He did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. She did not pretend to have plans she did not. And when the wind picked up and cooled the edges of the day, she did not go back inside. She stayed beside him. That night, after supper, she helped with the dishes. She moved slow, still sore from days on horseback, but she did not complain. He watched her hands, a little rough, but deft. Not a woman used to being idle. "Where are you from, before Bismarck?" he asked as he dried the last tin plate. "Iowa. Farm country. My folks died when I was 16. My brother and I came west." Victor nodded. He poured another cup of water for her and leaned against the counter. You are not planning on heading back east? She shook her head. There is no one left there for me. He looked at her for a long beat. Then maybe you ought to stay here a while longer. Celia held his gaze. Maybe I should. He offered her a quiet, steady half-smile. She returned it. Victor was not a man who rushed things. He fixed fences with care, trained horses with patience, and spoke only when he meant to. But he felt something settle in his chest when she looked at him, like that something hopeful. And for the first time in years, he found himself wanting company not just for a night or a season, but for the long kind of days. When she turned in that night and closed the door behind her, Victor stood in the kitchen alone, the lantern casting soft light across the wooden walls. Outside, the wind stilled, and for once, the silence felt full instead of empty. By the third day, the wind shifted. It came gentler from the south, carrying the scent of sage and warming the brittle grass. Celia stood at the edge of Victor's corral, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching a bay colt test the limits of his halter under Victor's steady hand. He's strong, she said, eyes following the colt's restless pacing. Victor didn't look up. Stubborn, too. Wants to lead, not follow. She leaned against the fence rail. That reminds me of my brother when we were little. If you told him to turn left, he'd go right just to prove he could. The colt jerked, and Victor paused, letting the rope go slack. That kind don't do well alone. Celia's fingers tightened around the rail. No, they don't. Victor gave the colt a moment, then stepped forward, calm and measured, the rope steady in his hand. She stayed quiet, watching how he moved, not forceful, but unwavering. When the colt finally settled, she let herself breathe. Later, near the barn, she picked through a pile of old tack, setting aside a cracked saddlebag and a halter with frayed stitching. Victor handed her a rag and sat beside her on an overturned crate. You ever break a horse? He asked, brushing dust from an old bridle. No, she said, rubbing the leather clean. But I've stitched a fair number of wounds. My brother used to bring home strays. Dogs, foxes once. Even a crow with a broken wing. I'd fix them best I could. You a healer? No. Just someone who didn't like to see things hurt. Victor nodded, quiet for a moment. Then, I've got a mare due to foal in a few weeks. If you've got the eye, you might keep watch. She gets nervous when I'm near. Celia met his gaze. I'd like that. He didn't smile, but there was something in the way he looked at her, like he'd decided something without needing to say it aloud. By the time the sun dipped low, she had scrubbed the last of the tack clean and stacked it neatly in the barn. Her hands were sore, but the ache felt earned. As she stepped outside, Victor stood by the well, drawing water into a wooden bucket. Dinner's in the pot, he said, passing her the dipper. She drank, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. You always cook the same time every day? He shrugged. Animals don't care what time it is, but I do. She laughed, the sound startling both of them. You've got a rhythm to things. Helps keep the ghosts out. Celia sobered. You have many? Few, he said. One more than I'd like. They ate quietly, the stew thick with potatoes and dried venison. Afterward, she helped stack kindling near the hearth. Her movements had grown more certain, her silences less guarded. Are you planning to go back to Bismarck? Victor asked as he straightened the chairs. No, she said, setting the last of the kindling down. I've nothing waiting for me there. He nodded once. Then you can stay as long as you need. She looked at him, eyes steady. What if I need longer than a while? He met her gaze. Then I'll still mean it. Outside, the stars were beginning to show, thin and silver across the darkening sky. Celia stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed against the cooling air. Victor joined her after banking the stove. Do you ever go into town? She asked. Only when I have to. Groceries, salt, mail. Do you ever see people? Not often. Most folks keep to their own fences. She exhaled, long and quiet. It's strange, not hearing voices in the distance. No wagons. No hammering boards. Just sky. He glanced at her. You miss it? I'm not sure yet. They stood like that for a long time, the porch boards creaking under their feet. A coyote cried out far off, sharp and lonely. Victor spoke without turning. There's a harvest fair at Deadwood in a month. They show horses, trade goods. Sometimes there's music. Celia looked sideways at him. Are you asking me to go? I'm saying I'll be going. Wouldn't mind company. She didn't answer right away. Then, I've never been to a fair. He nodded. Then it's time. She smiled, not bright or wide, just enough to crease the corner of her mouth. All right, Victor. I'll go. He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer, but something passed between them in the quiet, something understood. When she went inside to her room, he stayed out a while longer, watching the land grow dark. He hadn't expected her. He never thought to share his days with anyone again. But now, he found himself listening to the house behind him, her footsteps, the soft creak of floorboards, and wondering what it might be like if she stayed for more than just a season. Victor found her early that morning in the lean-to, sleeves pushed to the elbow, wrist deep in the grain sack. She was measuring by weight in her palm, her gaze narrowed in thought. You feeding my stock now? He asked, stepping through the open doorway. Celia didn't startle. Somebody ought to, if you're going to be out half the morning looking after fence posts. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her pour the grain into the trough. You always take over other folks' chores? Only when they do them too slow, she replied, brushing dust from her palms. The bay colt's taken to pacing again. He's anxious. Victor pushed off the frame, walked to the stall, and looked over the colt's shoulder. He's listening for something that's not coming. She picked up the empty pail. Aren't we all? He turned to look at her, but she was already walking toward the house. By midday, she was in the garden patch, knees in the dirt, pulling weeds with a deliberate grip. Victor brought her a tin of water and crouched beside her. You plant this? She asked, nodding toward the line of carrots just starting to show green. Last spring. Got more thistles than roots for it. She grinned faintly, sweat shining at her temples. Well, maybe I can coax something out of it now. He watched her tug a stubborn weed free with both hands. You planning to plant something of your own? I might, she said, if I stay long enough to see it grow. Victor didn't press her. He took the empty tin from her hand and stood. She looked up. You always this quiet around women? Only the ones who don't fill the air just to hear themselves speak. That earned a small laugh. I suppose I'll take that as a compliment. The day stretched warm and long. He worked the far fence line while she scrubbed the porch steps with well water and a stiff brush she found behind the woodpile. When he returned, his shirt damp and shoulders sun-browned, she was on her knees with a rag in one hand and a crooked smile on her lips. Tell me this place always had this much dust, or I'll take it personal. Victor stepped up beside her and crouched. It's the land. It settles into everything. She sat back on her heels, brushing her hands off on her skirt. Well, it's out of your porch at least. You'll thank me when you stop dragging it into your bed. He tilted his head. You planning to stay long enough to notice? She met his eyes, and the air between them shifted. I might. That night, the lantern burned low while they shelled beans at the table. Celia worked with a rhythm, her fingertips sure. Victor's hand moved slower, deliberate. Do you miss Iowa? He asked, keeping his eyes on the beans. I miss my mother's pie, she said after a pause. And the way the river smelled in late summer. But not the people. We were always the ones who didn't quite fit. He nodded. I know the kind of place. She looked over at him. What about you? My folks died before I was grown. I took to the trail young. Rode cattle from Texas to Nebraska. Every place looked a little like the last. Till this one. Victor nodded once. Something in the quiet here kept me. Celia leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Maybe it wasn't the quiet. He looked at her then, not just seeing her, but letting himself be seen. Maybe not. She didn't look away. You ever thought about what comes next, Victor? Most days, I'm just figuring out what comes with sunup. She gave a slow nod. That used to be enough for me too. Neither of them spoke for a long stretch. The lantern flickered against the walls, and the wind pressed low against the windows. Then she stood, brushing bean skins from her skirt. I'll be up early. I want to check the mare. She's moving slower. Victor rose with her. I'll come with you. She paused at the door to her room, hand on the knob. You don't have to. I know, he said. I want to. She lingered a moment, then gave a slow nod. All right. When the door closed behind her, Victor stood alone in the kitchen, the last of the beans still on the table. He didn't move to finish them. Instead, he walked to the window, looking out over the dark yard where the wind had finally gone still. He didn't know what would come with morning, but he knew, for the first time in years, he wanted to meet it with someone beside him. The mare foaled just before dawn. Celia had been sitting beside her since the moon was high, her back pressed to the stall wall, knees drawn up, lamplight flickering low. Victor entered quietly, the barn chill still clinging to his coat, and crouched beside her without a word. The foal was small but breathing steady, its coat slick and dark like river stone. The mare trembled but didn't fight them. Her eyes stayed fixed on Celia, as if she'd decided to trust her for reasons neither of them could name. "She's strong," Celia whispered, laying a gentle palm on the foal's damp side. Victor nodded, watching the rise and fall of the tiny ribs. "She'll take to standing soon." They stayed like that, side by side in the straw, until the first shaft of sun broke through the east window. Victor stirred, pushed to his feet, and offered Celia a hand. "You need rest," he said. "You've been out here all night." She took his hand and rose slowly, brushing straw from her skirt. It didn't feel long. Victor reached for an old blanket draped over the stall door and handed it to her. "At least take this." Mornings still sharp. Back at the house, Celia moved through the kitchen with a quiet ease, setting the kettle on while Victor stirred the fire back to life. Her movements had shifted, less cautious, more certain, as though the space no longer felt borrowed. He poured them both coffee when it was ready. They sat across from each other, the silence between them no longer filled with caution, but something settled. "You ever think about building on?" she asked, wrapping her hands around the cup. Victor looked up. "To the house." She nodded. "You've got the land. And your hands know wood." He considered that, gaze drifting to the window. "Thought about a second room once. Never needed it." "Might be time," she said. He didn't answer right away. "Then, you planning to stay that long?" Celia met his eyes. "I haven't made plans. But I'm not looking to leave." Victor nodded once, slow and sure. "If you do stay, it won't be as a guest." A quiet passed between them, not sharp, just waiting. Outside, the wind picked up again, softer than before, but steady. Celia looked toward the window. "I want to make something of this place," she said. "Not just patch windows or sweep floors. I want to help it grow. You already are." She seemed to take that in. Then she rose, poured more water into the basin, and began washing the mugs. Victor stood and took the towel without asking. They dried the dishes together in companionable silence. By mid-afternoon, Victor hitched the cart and loaded it with fence posts. Celia joined him without being asked, gloves already on. They worked the south pasture, digging and setting, tamping earth around the new cedar uprights. The sun bore down, but neither of them complained. At one point, Celia wiped her brow with her forearm and said, "There's a rhythm to this. Makes the hours go easier." Victor, driving another post into place, nodded. "Some days, it's the only thing that keeps the loneliness out." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't think you're lonely anymore." He met her gaze. "I'm not." They didn't speak of it again, but when the last post was set and the tools stowed in the cart bed, she climbed up beside him without waiting for an invitation. That evening, Victor brought out a battered fiddle case from under the bed. Celia raised a brow as he tuned it by the hearth. "I didn't take you for the playing type," she said. "I don't play well," he replied. "But I play." She listened as he began slow, halting notes that caught now and then, but held a kind of worn beauty. Not polished, but real. Celia sat back in the rocking chair, arms folded lightly across her chest, her eyes warm. When he finished, she said, "Play again." He did. Later, as the fire burned low and the last light faded behind the hills, she didn't go to her room. Instead, she stood by the window, her voice quiet. "I thought when I left Bismarck, I'd bury my brother and keep moving. That there wasn't anything left worth finding." Victor stood behind her. "There is." She turned to him. He didn't reach for her, not yet. But something in him leaned forward, like a man standing at the edge of something he'd waited years to see. "I want to build something here," she said. "With you." He took one step, then another, until they stood close enough for breath to touch breath. "We'll build it together," he said. She nodded, eyes wet but steady. And when he finally reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. The first frost came early that year, thin silver tracing the dry tufts of grass and stiffening the pump handle by morning. Celia stood in the yard with her shawl drawn close, watching the sun crawl over the hills. Victor had gone to the far pasture just after dawn, giving the cattle a last check before the weather turned hard. She'd been rising before light more often now, not from restlessness, but because the land asked it of her. There were linens to mend, jars to seal, and a root cellar that still needed boarding before the deep cold. She didn't need asking, she simply did what needed doing. When Victor returned, his gloves hung from his belt, and his coat was streaked with earth. He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Found this near the fence line," he said. "Looks like it came from a homestead wagon. Maybe dropped a season back." Inside the cloth were 2 small tin spoons, worn but intact, and a child's wooden whistle shaped like a bird. Celia turned it over in her hand. Someone must have lost more than they could carry. Victor nodded. "I'll keep it in the barn in case someone comes asking." She looked up at him. "You always keep what's left behind." "I try not to throw away what might still matter." They didn't speak again until supper, when the wind pushed low against the walls and the fire burned warmer than before. Celia pulled her stool closer to the hearth and worked a row of stitches into a worn muslin sheet. Victor sat nearby, sharpening his draw knife, the blade catching firelight as it passed over the stone. "You ever think about what it'd be like to raise a child out here?" Celia asked, not looking up. Victor paused, then set the knife down. "Not in a long time, but I've thought more lately." She pulled another length of thread. "I think about what kind of home we'd make, what kind of quiet would shape them. They'd know stillness," he said, "and work, and what it is to see something through." She finally looked up. "I think they'd be all right." Victor rose, crossed the space between them, and crouched beside her chair. "We could build that, if you want it." Her eyes didn't waver. "I do." He took her hand, not with urgency, just certainty. "Then we'll begin." The next weeks folded into each other with the kind of peace that came only after long years of ache. Celia cleared the spare room, turning it into a proper pantry with shelves Victor built to her measurements. He started cutting timber for the addition, and she helped him mark the lengths, her fingers confident with the chalk line. They made the trip to Deadwood as planned. Victor traded a gelding for winter feed, and Celia chose bolts of wool and calico from a merchant's wagon. She found a spool of blue ribbon and didn't say why she wanted it, and Victor didn't ask. That night, with the wagon loaded and the sky heavy with snow, they stayed at a boarding house on the edge of town. It was the first time they shared a room. Victor lit the lamp while she unpinned her hair. "You all right?" he asked. She turned to him, her voice steady. "I've never shared a bed with someone out of choice." He didn't move closer, just waited. She stepped forward. "But I do now." And so they lay down together, not hurried, not uncertain. Just 2 people who'd learned the shape of each other's quiet, and chose to meet in the middle of it. By spring, the new room stood painted and windowed. Celia moved her sewing table into the corner and planted a row of hollyhocks beneath the sill. The soil was tough, but she worked it until it yielded. Victor asked her to marry him with a ring he'd carved from walnut. She said yes with her hands on his shoulders, her forehead pressed to his. They married under the cottonwoods, with the new grass just coming in and the sky wide and kind. A neighbor rode in to witness, and the preacher from the trading post came on a borrowed mule. The vows were simple words, spoken soft and sure. After, they shared bread and boiled coffee with the handful of folks who came, and when the sun dropped low, Victor took her hand and led her back to the house that was no longer just his. Years passed, as they do. They planted plum trees and built a smokehouse. One winter, Celia gave birth to a daughter with her eyes and Victor's steady hands. Later, a son with a laugh that chased birds from the fence rail. They didn't speak often of the lives they'd left, not from sorrow, but because the home they built held enough. The days were full, the nights warm. They grew older without fear, knowing they had chosen each other not for need, but for the quiet certainty of love earned over time. And on the porch, with the sun dipping gold over the grass and the whistle of their youngest child trailing through the yard, Victor would rest his hand over Celia's and know he had found his place not in the land, but in the woman beside him, and in the life they built, one morning at a time.